Hello, and welcome back to another episode for Project Seed Money. My name is Sharissa Bradley, and I am so excited to be joined today by author and audiobook narrator Cass Medcalf. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great.
Gosh, yes, it's my pleasure. So I wonder, have you always wanted to be a writer?
It's being creative is something that I've always wanted to do. I was really passionate about acting as a kid. And as I got into my teen years, I loved writing. I took a creative writing class that was offered by my high school. It was in conjunction with like yearbook and creative writing magazine that we published every year. And the more I got involved with that, the more it became just part of my daily life. I continued to write every day in a notebook through college. And then after college, I kept a daily blog for a long time. Adulthood got in the way at some point, but I was really happy when I was able to get back into it after COVID. And I've been doing it ever since.
What was the actual push or catalyst to publish then? Because you've been a writer, it sounds like for your whole life almost.
Yeah, and I think there was something about like my public school experience that seemed a little bit different from a lot of my friends that I've talked to, in that my teachers were not particularly supportive as far as like kids in the arts. Like they were very clear to be like, have a backup plan. And early on, I also heard that like if you have a backup plan you take seriously, that's going to be what you end up doing, right? So I sort of came around completely backwards, where after COVID, I was a live sound engineer for live events. That was my day job, and that was what I was good at. I was a front of house sound engineer, and it was great, but all events got canceled. And so the thing that I did with my time after I took a big break, like we all did, kind of in early lockdown, and sort of reevaluated our life and what everything meant to us. Acting and writing were the two things that came back to me. So I doubled down with audiobook narration, which I had already started doing on the side. And then the more independently published authors I got to work with through audiobook narration, the more I realized, like, wow, there are so many people, especially women, like awesome women storytellers, that are completely bucking everything that their teachers or traditional media ever told them, and writing the story of their heart, putting it out there, and people are eating it up. Like it's not an uncommon story that women are changing their lives by independently publishing stories. And so it was only like a year or so after narrating for so many authors that I was like, I used to write all the time and I love it. Like I have a degree in English. Like I love doing this. What if I write a novel? And then once it was written and I edited it and I was reading through it again, I shared it with some friends. They were like, "So when is this coming out?" And then I self-published it.
Amazing. So it sounds like you were inspired by your clients.
I was 100%. My clients are amazing. Like every independent author I've worked with, I have forged so many like lifelong, not just client narrator relationships, but friendships. I am friends with like all of the writers I've narrated for, and they're incredible people, and they're so smart, and like their life experiences are so inspiring. Just amazing people.
That is so cool. Were they able to support you when it came to like the actual publishing process? If you had questions, things like that, did you have a community you could reach out to?
I think all indie authors have a community. So my best-selling author that I've narrated for, and she's incredibly busy, and she was probably the most inspiring of any ones that I've worked for, because I think I had narrated two books for her when her new book, like on release day, got into the top 100 on Kindle Store, and she exploded in popularity. And she kept working with me after that, which was, incredible for me. I was humbled by that, because it's not always the case. Like a lot of times when authors, find success, they kind of ride that and, take the deals that they can, as they should. But I was so happy. I continue to narrate for her and I love it. Her stories are amazing. And she is the one who pointed me to several online networking groups. She's where she was just like, look, it'll take me eons to tell you everything that I had to learn, but there are these amazing resources online. groups and forums of all sorts of authors helping authors. I highly recommend you join these groups. And so I did. And that helped launch all of my other friendships and networking relationships that I had with authors. I started going to conferences. I met even more amazing authors there. And then the more I started writing and the more my voice became important to me and like what I had to offer as an author. And when I started thinking of it, not just as a business, but as a personal brand and an expression of my own creativity and what I had to offer to the world of literature, I started connecting with other authors who we connected on those values and those morals. And so now I have more specific and unique communities that are centered around, my sexual identity and, my gender identity and the genres that I write. And even my regional location. I'm part of like a group of Minnesota authors now. That's the newest group that I've joined. And we're telling each other about like book fairs and all sorts of events. And like, it's so cool. Every community I'm in is so supportive and we're all helping each other every chance we get because it makes us all stronger.
I love that so much. That's beautiful. And we can so totally support each other by giving us each other the tools, because there is like all these little like facets to the publishing process. Like you can have a book, but then you have to have all these like little know-how, little skills. And I feel like in the publishing community, we just are like, we're more open about it. Like, here they are. Here's how you get that. Here is the website. Here is a YouTube video that I watched on formatting.
Yep. And like we end up, especially when our work complements each other so well. Like since I started writing monster romance, I'm with a monster romance authors group. And so we do newsletter swaps or we share my favorite chat that we have is where we share artwork that we've commissioned with each other. And that's amazing because we, through each other, have discovered so many, just dozens of independent artists who, incredibly talented illustrators, digital painters, comic artists as well. And because of that, like there's this awesome community of illustrators that we all work with and support too. So to see how like every stage of the publishing journey is supported, the stronger our networks are. It's just really cool. Like my favorite thing about my business is that I get to pay artists to make art for me and my fans. Like it feels like Christmas every time I get a new work of art of my characters. I'm just like,
I love that so much. You just see it come to life, this vision that you created with your words. I think that is so beautiful. I wonder, your story is a little bit interesting in the fact that you've written in multiple genres. So I wonder if you faced any vulnerabilities when you published that next book, and maybe was it different for you when you've published in different genres?
you know, so it's an interesting question because the first book that I wrote was a queer, contemporary, really women's fiction. I thought it was romance, and this was before I had really like learned what romance as a genre truly is. I knew I had read a lot of romances because I'd narrated a lot of romances. But personally as a reader, I like a more complex inner journey with a character, and I like to see self-actualization as part of a main character's journey through a story, right? And so that's more of like a women's fiction or contemporary fiction journey for any character, which I wasn't quite aware of at the time because, call it sexism or whatever, women's fiction is not really a genre you learn about in school or anything, really, right? And it sounds made up when you hear it for the first time. You're like, women's fiction? What, like, isn't it just fiction? And so the more I learned about the history of romance, the history of women's fiction, the history of women in the arts period, through my networks and also just through my own self-education, the more I realized that I started out with my contemporary romance series, my contemporary women's fiction series, marketing it completely incorrectly. And I love my covers. And because there is so much crossover between romance fiction and women's fiction, I didn't completely shoot myself in the foot. But the more I tried to network with other authors who were writing in the same genre, the difficulties there were as a queer author, but specifically as a bisexual author, there's kind of a chasm between sapphic romance or gay romance and straight romance. And bisexual romance really isn't, it doesn't have a space from a marketing standpoint because it's a more fluid identity, right? Just like being non-binary, like is a tough identity to kind of like sell or market, right? So the longer I tried to make it work in contemporary romance, the more I kind of kept bumping into these issues where like I would try to work with a bunch of sapphic authors for like a newsletter share, and they would be like, but you only have one sapphic book. And I'm like, well, I mean, I have I have several bisexual characters, like, you know, like and they're like, no, but like only, but it's like only the one where it's two women together. And I'm like, oh, okay, all right. So, you know, I couldn't really do that promo. Then I was just like, well, maybe I need to network more with straight romance because I have a lot of straight presenting couples in my books. But when I ran into that, all of the marketing and the shared world and the tropes that they wanted to have weren't as, they didn't feel as genuine to the types of relationships that I wanted to write. The problematic heterosexual like tropes that are very common are not things that I'm really interested in writing. And it was becoming harder to like find the right fit for my contemporary romance stories. So I had to kind of look at my brand and look at the stories I wanted to write and look at the types of relationships I write. And when I realized I wanted to write stuff that was more fluid and have that, again, that self discovery of sexuality be really important to the journey, I had to look at the genres that entertained that or the markets that enjoyed that. And what I found was monster romance and paranormal romance is a lot more friendly to fluid expressions of sexuality and diverse sexual journeys across series and across characters, which there's a whole history of monsters being code for queerness in media in general, which I would, you know, I'd talk about for hours if you let me. But when I realized that monster romance wasn't just like fun appendages and, you know, like exciting kinks, and it was actually like also finding ways to express queerness and, you know, being more accepting of differing sexualities, or even just being exploring the journey of like someone who never fit in finding acceptance even though they seem different than their partner. The more monster romances I read where that was key to the plot, the more I was like, this is what I need to be writing. Like I like, yes, it's weird and it's fun and it's crazy, but there is so much heart here that really resonates with me that I need to be writing in. And honestly, I kind of haven't looked back. I do have some contemporary romances still in my head that I want to write, but the audience and the author community in the monster space has been so supportive and fun that I just want to stay here and I want to keep writing in this genre.
I think that's so beautiful. And I love the complexities of the characters that you write and how I did have the opportunity to read a couple of your monster romance books and I just absolutely loved I did fall in love with Tiffany and Lillian. Like I don't know how you couldn't, right? They just struggle in their own worlds and there's so much complex character development and you do have so much like growth in who they become as the people that they become at the end. And to have it be like this it is like it's monsters, it's under the sea, it's these vibes, but you kind of trick us into doing these really complex emotional things in a way that is safe to explore that. And I think that's beautiful. And I do believe you write that in your books as well, that like that's why you do that is because you're trying to explore these things in a safe way and to allow people that space to do that as well. And to see it played out. That was so much fun. I had so much fun reading your books and living in that world for a little while. So I think you're absolutely on the right track. And if as a reader, as a fan, I can say that like yes, you're in the right place. I love your monster romances. Keep going. Yay. So thank you. Thank you for finding the space that made sense for you and continuing in that path because I can't wait to read more.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that. And thank you. Thank you so much. Because it is like I love that internal journey. I think like miscommunication trope gets a bad rap because so many issues can be solved with a simple conversation. But for me, the interesting part of miscommunication trope is when you can give your characters real reasons why they're not saying the thing, right? And I think so much of human experiences, like we feel like we can't say the thing. Either we're insecure or we're afraid or we think we're going to hurt somebody, right? And that's where, like, when you can relate to your character making the stupid decision that holds them back, that's when you really start to explore like what makes us people, like what makes love hard, you know? And I love exploring that in my silly kinky monster romances and having a few laughs along the way, right? Because that's also a big part of my brand is I'm funny. And even though I can write really dark themes in my romances, I mean you read Bride of the Kraken too, which gets very dark and quite, like horror inspired. But I mean, my characters are in ridiculous situations. Like, if they didn't stop and laugh at it, I think they'd probably go crazy.
Agree. And the juxtaposition of it is like tickles my mind. It's like my favorite thing. It's like a Jackson Pollock. It's like the organized chaos. It's like the thing you think you're getting, but you're getting this depth. And that is something that I adore in writers that have that ability to give you that. And I definitely feel like you have that. And I'm so grateful you found your voice and stuck with it.
Thank you. I agree. Like those are my favorite kinds of books to read.
Me
So
too.
when
Yeah.
I realized like, wait a minute, I could write this. Like, like when you start reading a bunch of books where you can see the twist coming a mile away, but then you find one where you're like, I never would have seen that coming. But when you reread it, everything makes sense. And like, those are the types of books I want to write, and I loved getting the feedback from readers of just like, I never in a million years would have guessed, but like, also, of course. And I'm like, I did it. I nailed it.
You totally nailed it. Oh, I love that. And I do want to bring up the fact that you also are an audiobook narrator. Like you are an author and you do this amazing thing and you do have this amazing way of telling stories, but you also have an ability to help other people share their stories. And I want to get to that as well and just talk about what is the author experience like? When should they start looking to reach out to you? Like maybe with their plan of having the book and the audiobook published on the same day, maybe there's some sort of a timeline that they need to prepare for. And I wonder if you can speak to those things a little bit about your process and your onboarding.
Yeah, absolutely. So audio is the fastest growing segment of the publishing industry. I think while sadly literacy rates in general in the US are going down, I think that those who are literate are finding new ways to explore literature in a way that makes it more accessible to them as a busy adult. And audio is that, right? And so as the publishing industry continues to grow, audio is the biggest slice of that pie as fast as it's growing. But I think it's really important because you said like when should an author reach out about audio? It's really important to point out that the best-selling audiobooks are the best-selling books. Like having an audiobook is not going to turn you into a best-selling author overnight. Audio is part of your overall marketing plan. I talk to a lot of authors about, audiobooks and a lot of narrators about, all of it, right? Because I do both and I'm in both of those worlds. And I sell better on my wide audiobook platforms than I do on Amazon with ebooks. And that is wholly unique. But the reason I do is because I was a narrator first. Most of my fan base found me through my live narration on TikTok when I was heavily marketing on TikTok, and then I got banned and now I'm salty about TikTok, so I don't narrate live on there anymore. But I do narrate live on my Discord, which many of when I got banned on TikTok, many of my fans followed me to my Discord, which I'm very grateful for. They're wonderful people and we had a great time, and it was my narration that brought people on. And so I think if you are writing a book and you want it to sell really well, focus first on marketing the ebook and the physical book. And if it does well, if you're seeing yourself in, the top 100, 200 in your category on Amazon or wherever you're selling, that's when you should start thinking about audio in general. You want to make sure that you have a product that is selling, that people are relating to. Ideally, wait until fans or your readers reach out to you to ask for audio. because that shows that you have an audience that's hungry for it, because it's an investment. And there are, more cheap ways than ever to create a cheap audiobook through AI narration. And I'm not going to put a judgment call on that. I mean, I think there are a lot of moral reasons not to engage in generative AI, period. And audiobook narration is a part of that, between environmental reasons to the fact that it was built on stolen work to, there are so many moral reasons not to engage in it. But I also understand that independently published authors are also just trying to make a living doing what they do. And so, it's hard to be moral in a morally gray world, right? But if you want to work with a narrator, if you have interest in your library, if people are reaching out to you wanting audio, and if you are selling ebooks well, that's when you should start, if you haven't already, listening to audiobooks in your genre. Hear the voices that are popular, hear what they sound like, read reviews. I know for me as a listener, and again, I'm a reader who prefers women's fiction over like more traditional romance, right? We were talking about that. That also kind of goes for narrators. I prefer narrators who have a more like nuanced approach to narrating. So when I'm looking into hiring a male narrator for my books, I can't trust my own judgment because I don't swoon for the same male narrators that romance listeners swoon for, right? So, with that, I need to listen to my readers and I need to see what narrators are popular. I'm not saying you're gonna get the most popular narrator for your first audiobook, and you probably won't. The more popular the narrator, the more expensive they're going to be because they have an audience of their own, just like I had an audience of my own that I brought into my own work when I started writing. But you should know how they sound. And you should get a feel for, is this a voice that will help me market my book? Is this a voice that readers want to listen to? So look at reviews, listen to audiobooks, get a feel for what the end product sounds like. And then look at those narrators who are narrating those books. Follow them on social media, start engaging with them. All narrators that are professional, that are doing this professionally as a full-time job, should have a website that you can contact them through. I have a website. My email is right on there. I don't use a contact form because that gets weird for me, but I have my email that people can reach out to me directly when they're interested in a book. People think it's gauche to talk about rates, but in general, like a union minimum per hour rate for your like finished product of audio, you're going to be looking at around $300 per finished hour, because that's what a union like professional rate is at this point. And if you're looking at for a good narrator, they're going to be charging around that. There are narrators that charge less than that. There are narrators that charge more than that, right? That's the union minimum. So that's going to be around the number that you're going to see. So be prepared, know how long your book is. A good rule of thumb is for every 9,000 words in your manuscript, that's about 1 hour of audio. So if you have a 54,000 word novel, that's about 6 hours of audio. So have in your mind that, the budget for that, a 6 hour audiobook, a 54,000 word novel, that's going to cost, a little under $2,000 to produce with a professional narrator. So be aware of that when you're reaching out to narrators, and be aware of that benchmark. If you're planning to crowdfund, you might want to do that ahead of time, maybe before you reach out to your narrators. And that's also a good opportunity to, talk to the people who are donating to your campaign of who their favorite narrator is, because that'll give you an idea of who to reach out to, right? Or if you're funding it yourself, then make sure you find a narrator who has a social media presence that says they are a narrator, because we're all, if we're taking this seriously, we're marketing ourselves, right? Make sure they have a website and contact them, through whichever way they say to contact them. Typically email is going to be your best bet. Reach out to them, let them know how long your book is, let them know what genre it is. If there are any content warnings, let them know ahead of time, like, hey, this is the type of book I have, this is the type of subject matter that it deals with. Is this something you narrate and that you're comfortable narrating? And if so, what does your schedule look like? And can we work together? Typically, once a narrator starts recording, I think 6 weeks is a pretty good, for a solo narrated or a dual narrated. 6 weeks is about the timeline once for the contract start date, from start to finish. But it might take you longer than that to get on a narrator's calendar. Especially the more popular they are, they might be booked out 6 to 12 months. So keep that in mind. Not all narrators are. I have gaps in my calendar. We all might have gaps in our calendar here and there that something might pop up. Some narrators ask for a deposit up front, usually 20%. Others don't. It's kind of individual because we're all freelancers for the most part. And then aside from that, yeah, once you get on their calendar, I'd say 6 weeks because that gives the narrator time to prep, record. If you have any voices or characters in mind that you want to get right, tell the narrator that in advance. Give them a list of the characters that are really important to you, that like, hey, they have this accent or they have this kind of voice, or, they're more shy versus more assertive, right? It's good to know that as a narrator going in, so we can send you samples ahead of time for you to approve. So we can kind of have a back and forth where we're casting your characters if that's important to you. And because once you approve those samples, it's really up to the narrator to then take it the rest of the way. So if there is something important to you, make sure you bring that up when you're negotiating the contract and the dates, and say, a pronunciation guide is also super helpful, especially if you write fantasy. It's really nice to have that, in advance, so we're not going through, 3 hours in and we've pronounced the main character's name wrong. Nobody likes that.
Or the cities or the towns or the places that you're going or the roads. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, voices, accents. If you based your character off a particular Hollywood actor, send a clip. Like send a YouTube video. I recently just did a historical time travel, like sci-fi romance, and it took place during like World War II era. And the author had certain old Hollywood actors in mind that at first when we were negotiating, she didn't tell me she had particular characters in mind. She just told me like, well, he's kind of got a Boston accent, but make it subtle. And so I did what I thought was that. And then she was like, no. This wasn't what I had in mind at all. This is terrible. This is like, we might need to cancel the contract. I'm like, wait. Is there an actor with like the voice that you have in mind? And she's like, oh, well, yeah, like this guy. And she sent me a clip and I watched it. I'm like, very different from what I was picturing in my head, but this is why we have references, right? So after listening to the clip, I sent a new sample. She loved it. And we were able to move on from there. And I'm almost wrapped up with the whole series now. So like, it sounds silly, but like, because you made these characters and you poured so much of your heart and soul into them and you think it's obvious who these people are. But when you're working with another artist, they're bringing their whole context of everything they've ever read to it as well. And your book is going to be unique. It's going to be unique to you. So share those things, the things that you care most about, the characters you care most about, the pronunciations. And yeah, the 6 weeks for narrators to prep, for you guys to approve samples, to then record, and then narrators typically are their own production company as well. So they will send to a proofer, they will then send to an editor and masterer, and then they send you the files that are ready to upload to whatever distribution site you use for your audiobooks.
Really? So in that whole process, if someone is looking for the narrator and they're looking to do this, what are some red flags that they should watch out for? Like maybe some red flag answers or responses, or just like even the way that those people are communicating with them.
That's a good question. The first red flag is if they haven't done an audiobook before. And I hate to say it because we all start somewhere, right? But many people want to be audiobook narrators because it's a really cool job. It's awesome. Like I love my job. It's amazing. But it is, you wear a ton of hats and there are a lot of skills involved. And I mean, like I have a bachelor's degree in audio production. I have a bachelor's degree in English literature, and I did acting my whole life throughout high school, and I have like professional acting training, right? Not everybody has that. And I'm not saying you need to be a good narrator. There are many people who are self-taught that are phenomenal. But if you're just starting out and you don't have any one of those skills, it might take you longer. You might not be fully aware of what you're getting yourself into. If it's your first book, you're going to be learning a little bit on the job. You're not going to be as confident on mic. And I have heard so many horror stories from authors who are working with someone who it's their first book and they love the sound of their voice, but it's not just the sound of somebody's voice. It's the way they use a microphone. It's the way they edit. It's the whether or not they can take out mouth sounds, because like when you talk to someone in person, you're not hearing the ridiculous amount of clicks and pops and saliva noise that a microphone 2 inches away is going to pick up. Right. So an audiobook end product is very different from hearing someone in a voice memo or, a phone recording. So that's the first red flag is like, do they have at least a handful, but, ideally more than 10 audiobooks under their belt? The second red flag is if they don't have any social media. That doesn't necessarily mean their government name, but like if they have a pseudonym, because many narrators do, because they don't necessarily want their government name connected with, kinky BDSM smut. And, that's fine. That's choice. That's their choice. It's their business. But their pen name should have some social media. Minimum a website, for sure. Not that you can't hire someone if they don't have a website, but if they don't have a website, they better be hustling on Instagram and TikTok and, everywhere else. They need to have a presence for sure. And if all of that checks out, you're probably fine, because again, you're establishing that they do this as a business and that they take it seriously. But then as for any other red flags, I mean, everybody negotiates contracts differently. I don't necessarily have like a go-to contract because, circumstances change from author to author, right? And so many authors now, if they want dual narration or duet narration, if I'm mastering the book, or if they want to save some money by maybe proofing it themselves, or they have beta readers who will listen for them and proof the book for them, I'm flexible with authors because I believe a lot in audio and I want authors to be able to produce audiobooks. And I've done a lot of first audiobooks for authors. And so because I treat each client pretty individually, I don't have a standard contract right away, but I'm willing to draft one up for an author. So if someone's unwilling to sign a contract, I would say that's a red flag. But if you have to like negotiate for a bit before like they send one, that's not necessarily a red flag because a lot of times you just want to get all of the particulars in line before you put it in writing so you don't end up having something on a piece of paper that neither of you guys agreed on that suddenly, payments due and they didn't do a thing that you thought you said they would, so yes, I understand people want a contract a lot of the times, but if you are putting a contract together, make sure, you're willing to negotiate, you're willing to change things, both parties to make sure that everybody's happy. And I think those are the main major red flags. I would say just like the main thing for me is make sure they've done a few books and make sure they have a social media presence that at least if they don't deliver, that they're going to also suffer a little bit for it because their brand is going to be damaged, right? That's kind of the collateral that professionally as media professionals we have. Once we've established a brand, we're going to be interested in maintaining that and keeping a good reputation. The other thing, of course, is just basic business. If they're not responding to emails, if it takes forever for them to get back, and not necessarily like more than an hour, but if it takes more than a week for someone to get back to you, they're probably going to be a little difficult to work with, unless there's, some outstanding crisis going on. And in which case they should be able to tell you that when they do finally get in touch. But yeah, that's pretty standard dealing with anybody in any business, I would say.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And I love what you said about having a couple under your belt because, especially if you're expecting them to do the mastering or like to deliver the files to you, if they have never uploaded to a platform, if they have never, like, just for instance, like if you're uploading your files to ACX, you immediately get like warned whether or not they worked. But like if that person has never tried and they don't understand like exactly what the levels are supposed to be at, that's going to be a headache even after the fact. Like, so having a couple under your belt and having that experience of going all the way through the process, it's not just sound files. They're so specific. How much room noise? Do they know how much room noise you're supposed to have at the beginning and the end of every single track? And do they know how to do all of that? So it's so technical. And really, especially if you're spending that kind of money, like minimum $2,000, you want to make sure that this person is going to be able to deliver for you. So I love the way that you said, like, that's how they take collateral too. If they don't have a front facing presence and they can't get hit on that front facing presence, there's going to be less accountability on their end. So I think those are both, or all of those red flags are really, really helpful. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and, I'm not advocating shaming somebody,
Oh, sir.
on social media or something like that. However, like, but you wanna know that they're for real
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely. And that's
go with what they're
perfectly reasonable and fair in the state of the world that we currently live in. And the fact that, like, post COVID, everything got shut down and we got online. Like, if you don't have online at this point, it's kind of, I mean, you could do it for free by yourself at this point. So that there's really no excuse to not have some sort of front facing website, some sort of, this is what I offer. About place for testimonials. If they don't have testimonials or reviews and things like that, like that's a huge thing to have a website. So yes, I completely agree.
I also wanna point out there's a big difference, especially because there are a lot of men on TikTok with sexy voices who have made a bit of a career out of having a sexy voice on TikTok and reading copywritten material that is not their own on lives and just doing it in a sexy voice really close to a microphone. There's a big difference between having a cameo and having a library on Audible that you can look at and search, right? So just because a man has a microphone and a sexy voice, and I say man, but I mean anyone.
Could
It's
be
just
anyone.
it's just we've all seen
Oh
the
yeah.
accounts I'm talking about.
Oh yeah.
Fans might tell you they want that person to narrate your book. Be smart. Like, don't, again, make sure they've done a book before if you're going to be paying, especially because somebody like that with that kind of feral fan base might be asking as much as $1,000 per finished hour to do a book for you. And if that's the case, you want to make sure that they have a proven track record before you even approach touching something like that.
Oh, I could not agree more. Really do your homework. We're not looking for a surface level when we're looking for audiobooks, because that is an expensive mistake to make for sure. So I do want to ask, where can my audience find you? Where can they find your books and your services?
Well, because I'm a professional, I have a social media presence. Most of my tags, anywhere I am, is at Cassandra Medcalf VO. VO stands for voiceover, right? That's my Instagram, that's my Facebook. On TikTok, that account got shut down. So it's just at Cassandra Medcalf on TikTok, although I don't use that platform as much anymore because they shut me down. So I do have a website, which is cassandramedcalf.com, that has both the books that I've written and quite an extensive library of samples and audiobooks as well. You can also search me on any audiobook platform, on Audible, on Hoopla, on Libby, wherever you listen to audiobooks, Chirp. I'm going to be there. If you search Cassandra Medcalf, you'll be able to see the books that I've written that I've narrated, and also books that I've narrated for other authors. And, I have all kinds of genres that I've narrated. And so if you want to listen to samples, they're totally out there. And if you want to email me, my email address is on my website. I have two different emails, one for author inquiries and one for narration inquiries. And so I keep them separate. They're separate on my website, and I explain it pretty clearly. And other than that, for my books, once again, everything's on Amazon because it has to be. But my books, the audiobooks are wide. The paperbacks are also wide or are capable of being wide. So you can also go to your favorite bookstore and, have your favorite bookseller order one of my paperbacks if you're interested in doing that. Or if you want to order a signed paperback from me, I go to events fairly often throughout the year. Those are also listed on my website if you are in the Minnesota or area or Midwest and you want to come see me in person.
So cool. Thank you so much. I just have one last question for you. And then it's just, if you have any advice that you can inspire my audience, they're female authors, they're sitting on the fence, and maybe fear is what's stopping them at this point. And I wonder if you can just encourage them to keep going.
Absolutely. I mean, if you love reading and you love writing, first of all, you're allowed to do it for you. if you're afraid to share. So my first advice is if you love to do it for you. And if you have some trusted friends that or if you like posting on fan fiction forums or wherever you choose to share, share to your trusted communities first to get feedback. Sometimes family can be harsh, but if you know someone loves the types of things that you love, they can be great people to share with and get honest feedback. That can also be really enheartening. But it's okay to do it for yourself. And if you find that you really love it and you want to keep doing it, there really isn't a downside to sharing your work with the world and hitting publish. Like the worst thing that can happen is people don't read it. And that's no different than if you never share it in the first place. So, it's never too late. And once you feel ready, feel free to share. But first, just start doing it because that's what you love to do.
That's so beautiful, Cass. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And thank you for being here today. We are just so thrilled to have your value on this podcast.
Thank you so much. I had a great time.
Thank you so much for joining me on another episode for Project Seed Money. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And I will see you with another interview next week.